Morning. Thank you for joining me today. I've been having a series of conversations with my friend here, Alessandro, and talking about the connection between marketing outside to the external world and the culture. And it just suddenly occurred to me that we should probably record some of these conversations because there's some interesting things that come up, and we've got slightly different viewpoints, but ones that really do coexist. And so I thought it'd be a good time to bring Alessandro on and to kind of talk about what he sees the link being and carry on the conversation online. So, morning, Alessandro. How are you doing?
Good morning to you, Lee. I'm very, very good. Thank you.
Brilliant. So I guess let's start off with what's your take on the connection between marketing and culture?
Yes, so many people are familiar with the traditional marketing. My area of expertise, I like to maybe share a little bit the background, is called empathic marketing. So empathic
Hmm.
marketing is more put in the shoes of the other person, whether they like is a customer, is a client, or in particular, that is what we discussed, the two of us, even like a colleague within your organization or another department. We should treat them or see them as a potential client where we need to empathize with them. We need to put in their shoes in order to communicate with them in a way that is productive for both of us as a sender and as a recipient.
Okay, it's an interesting kind of take. I guess a lot of people don't think of the various interactions we have as businesses and business owners, and everything feels quite separated. So, we have marketing specialists, we have culture specialists, we have, business specialists. What you're suggesting is actually if you look at all of them with this connector of empathy, of trying to understand the position from everyone, there's a business benefit to that.
Yes, because there are like three different types of marketing. There is like the psychological marketing, which is what they call like a business within self, which is more like our identity as a human being, the self-perception, maybe inner clarity. Like
Mm.
in this case, Lee or Alessandro has like this self-marketing or psychological marketing. Then this
Mm.
is projected. I usually give the example of a mirror, the analogy of a mirror. Now we mirror our internal inner voice to the other person, which is more the internal marketing and what we call like
Mm.
a business within business. So
Yeah.
between colleagues or between departments. And sometimes we have maybe the marketing department, which is very creative, or the marketing expert, very creative, but we have maybe the operational department that is more logical. So we need to really understand how can we communicate despite the fact that we work within the same team or company, but in a way that
Mm.
is relatable. And then this is the internal marketing is projected to the external world, business within consumer or business to business. So there are for me like these three layers, like the
Mm.
outer, the inner, and the deeper, that are really really important. So if we want to attract maybe top talent for our company or ideal clients, we need to use exactly the same strategy from my point of view.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. I think what it does kind of fly in the face of is a lot of the theories around all of those areas uses this idea of like a stereotypical version of someone. So in marketing, we talk about the ideal customer profile or the customer avatar. In culture, we'll talk about this kind of employee, but it's kind of like a faceless employee. I think what I've enjoyed about listening to the way that you talk about it is that has some help. But what really helps if we can get into the mind of the person that we're trying to talk to and take them away from this kind of stereotype into more of the human being below the stereotype. Would you agree that's your take?
Yes, it's my take in particular because everything that we project to the other person, if we project the clarity and we project the respect for the other person, no matter like the level that the other person is at the moment, that is
Mm.
like is a reflection to the way that we communicate. So we are human beings. no matter if we work within a company, on our own, between departments. So it's very, very important to see everyone as a human being and treat them, as you said, maybe your ideal client, or craft your ideal client profile, your avatar, also for your top talent or for your colleague. If I'm a manager and I need to help the company to grow, I would put myself in the shoes of the other person in order to provide better value to them. Despite that they are not my clients, but we need to treat at the same level of our top client, our ideal client. So the human being is the most important thing for any kind of relationship or conversation to build a very strong and healthy culture within a company.
Yeah. I mean, I probably have more focus on the culture side of it,
Okay.
because I think particularly with startups who are trying to define what their company is, both externally and as they grow the team internally, I think sometimes there's a danger that a lot of focus is put on that external part, and the branding and the brand conversation typically happens a lot more than the culture conversation. But if you look at operational failures, it's never because the brand isn't strong enough. It typically is centered around something internally, that ultimately goes back to the culture. For example, toxic cultures of startups is unfortunately something that people are aware of. They are, because the focus is on growth, and the founder has decided to kind of make a lot of sacrifices and compromises in order to achieve their goal. There's sometimes an association that their employees are going to be prepared to do the same. And it starts using people rather than working with people. And that, I think, has a really bad impact later on, because if it's a success, you've created this culture of resources as opposed to people, and actually increases your chances of things going wrong in the future. Because when we start looking at when companies have wobbles of success, a lot of it can be determined by the people in the company feeling that they can behave in a certain way, either because that's endorsed by the company or as a response to the way that the company treats them, and can cause that impact of, we live in a world now where there isn't an inside and an outside of a business. It's too easy for a team member to go on to social media and explain what it's like to work for you. You can't then also have this bright, shiny marketing strategy that completely flies in the face of that, right?
Yes, and this links to, I really like the conversation because we are looking from a, let's say, cultural point of view, but also from a psychological point of view. I usually suggest to my, for example, existing client, treat your client as the brand ambassador. The same thing for like a company. If your employees or the people that they support your business growth, they become your brand ambassadors, they communicate online with maybe friends. You also do marketing for free. You don't need to invest any kind of budget because your people, the people that you treat in the same way that you would treat your top clients, now they are spreading the word, the good word. And we know from a marketing point of view that the word of mouth is one of the most cost-effective way to increase like visibility, awareness. So when we reflect like the internal culture, and the vehicle, I call the vehicle, is the human being, like your employee, that spread online and offline. That is a really, really good way to grow in a very healthy way rather than the toxic way. And also, if I
Yeah.
can add, based on my experience, I remember if I'm not satisfied about my environment where I work within a company or my colleagues, that also going to reduce the level of let's say productivity. So it's really, really important to treat everyone as your body. would you like treat in the wrong way your body? No. And the same for like an employee. This is my experience.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think the one constant that we've all got is, we've worked somewhere that was great to work and somewhere where it was really, really tough. A lot of my experience was in investment banking and financial services. It's known as a tough industry, and it had encouraged this sort of work hard, play hard mentality. But you also realized that people were essentially burning out within their sort of mid 30s, 40s, because you can't keep that pace up. And I think this is why it's so short term thinking to use the stick rather than the carrot. Because if you create an environment where things get done out of fear or pressure, yes, you will get results, but they will be short-lived, and you don't have that tailwind of those brand ambassadors that you mentioned. If people leave your company because you are difficult to work for and it's being pressured, that's not the great advertisement for the rest of the top talent to think, oh, I want to go and work there. And I think some of the larger companies have really understood the need for, that employee value proposition being as strong as possible, and how important it is to have the feeling of you're being part of something. And yet we also have this other point of view, which is that trying to create an EVP, thinking of why people should work for you and why it matters, it's almost seen as this kind of soft skill set that maybe you need, but maybe you don't. Whereas I guess what we're saying is actually it's fundamental to your commercial success that your people are happy and inspired, because that helps bring the talent pipeline your way.
I believe like happiness creates creativity, and creativity is where we grow as a human being, as like
Mm,
in your case, Lee or Alessandro, but also as a company. If we
mm,
don't allow the person to be in a very good environment, to be happy, to be satisfied with everything, despite there are up and downs in life, because we can't say that it's gonna be a perfect environment. Sometimes there are like situation that there is the pressure, and the pressure like reduce the level of creativity. But
mm,
based on my experience, now I work on my own. But in the past, when I worked within companies, the environment that gave me a lot of like creativity was the environment where I felt like safe, and also like a family environment, despite it was like a
mm,
more a work environment. But if I had to ask a question to a person or suggest something, despite that maybe they were top manager, that is
mm.
the environment where I feel heard, understood, and that is where I can provide better suggestion to the growth of the company, no matter my level of within a company. So creativity comes from a good environment rather than an
Yeah.
environment which is toxic.
Yeah, it's so interesting. So there's a conversation that's been going around. I've seen it on social media for the last probably 9 to 12 months, about this pushback beyond, your company shouldn't feel like your family. So the thinking is, that in itself can be toxic. That if we're talking about family in connection, empathy, feeling like you're part of something bigger and that your contribution matters, I think that's the sort of family that you're referencing there. But we've got this really interesting definition of almost like the toxic family, the one that expects sacrifice from you, with nothing coming back. You're unloved, you're unwanted, but you're tied here and caught. And I think again it goes to this current trend towards treating people with empathy, or thinking of empathy in relation to your business as somehow softening your ability to have success. And maybe that's a consequence of a world that, has fairly recently gone through a pandemic. There's still a lot of trauma response, I think, from people, where they cared so much. Now there's almost like a pushback, and we don't want to care because it's tough. But I see it in some of the framing of, oh, if somebody describes my business as a family, that's a red flag. It's like, but it shouldn't be if we go back to that true thinking of empathy. And what's your take on how do we get that back? How do we get back to empathy being seen as a superpower and not this kind of soft skill that can be ignored if they feel like it?
Empathy, from my interpretation, even when I mentioned the word of family, which I know that there are pros and cons to see something as a family, it's like giving reassurance to the other person. Again, reassurance can be like a friend, a colleague, or a client. Is exactly the same. The reassurance that when you need the help, I'm next to you. Which doesn't mean that I'm gonna like do the work for you, which can be like the negative side of the family. Is when you need the help, I'm next to you because I can support you. I've already been in that particular situation. Accountability is another one. Sometimes we have the knowledge to do something, but it's difficult to implement. So I put in your shoes. I know that maybe I'm more experienced than you, or I'm an expert in one specific area. Okay, so I'm accountable because I help you also to execute. So accountability, giving the confidence to the other person that they can achieve everything. That is where I see empathy as like the bridge between the psychological marketing, the internal marketing, and the external marketing. So are these skills we call soft skills, but they are the skills that give the other person the safety. When I mention like the word family, is the safety. I'm not going to do anything for you in terms of I'm not going to work twice or do my work at your work, but I give you an environment where you feel safe and maybe supported by me.
Yeah. And I think it's trying to understand that when we're talking about introducing empathy into these things, it's a human condition to have empathy that has been in a lot of ways dulled down in recent years. And so what you're talking about really is kind of reintroducing the connection between them, not introducing something that is going to be difficult to implement. And I think, obviously I talk startups most of the time, and I think it's really interesting to think of it in that lens, because if we look at the psychological contract that we have with employees, so this idea that we're going to be safe, where the business is agreeing to give us meaningful work in a safe environment and reward us accordingly. In a startup, it's like you might get one out of those three.
Yes.
It's not a particularly safe environment, so they can't guarantee that work. They want to be able to compensate appropriately, but the funds may not be there. So they're really leaning in on that meaningful work and contributing something, but that has to feel equal. And I think the risk in startups is that there's this ask from their team members to contribute and to add value, but it's understanding that at some point that value has to be returned. And, saying thanks and being grateful will go so far, but the psychological contract requires the other two. It requires the safety, and it requires the fact that you'll be compensated fairly. And that's the risk, I think, for a lot of startups when they start growing and building their team out. The compromises they have to put, I think, within a time frame. So they have to think to themselves, when we achieve this level of growth, or when we've been going for this long, that's when we're going to lock down the employee experience so that they can bring in people and start developing that talent pipeline. What typically happens is the timelines and the deadlines and the targets are put on the external branding. When we've got to this size, our marketing strategy is going to go up. how do you suggest that companies look at both together rather than seeing it as this one has to be sacrificed for the other? How can they do both?
Transparency, I think, is the best one. So we want to be transparent to the external world, but we also want to be transparent to the people that they work with us. Because sometimes we overdo something which is more like the external, because the external world, like a client, bring us money, but we don't really think about the other way around. The other way around, if I very, very transparent, have something which is a plan that I share with everyone within the company, or even like if it's a small business or startup, that allowed me to add an extra layer each time rather than adding maybe 10 layers to the external world because we want to generate money, and maybe just one layer to the internal. Is to, like, if I put 3 layers outside, I need to put 3 layers inside and treat both of them like the yin and yang. So I needed to have the balance between the two. And for me, transparency is where you give me safety. Despite, as you said, a startup can't give you this level of safety that a company, an established company, can give you. Transparency is my top suggestion. Knowing that sometimes the transparency also has the negative side, because when you are too transparent, people might judge you for something, but we need to be vulnerable. Another part of empathy, be vulnerable to the other person and provide your suggestion in order to help the other person to reduce the level of vulnerability. But transparency would be my top suggestion.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that. I think there's an issue when we talk about the inside and the outside of the business. It is that transparency that unfortunately sometimes gets thrown around as a tagline rather than actually done. So, you know, we hear a lot of companies who in their marketing will say we're transparent, we're open, we're authentic, we're honest. But what they have to, I think, appreciate is that customers now can sort of look behind the screen pretty easily and see, you know, if you're telling us you're open, but your team don't feel like they can be open, they can challenge, they can be empowered to move this thing forward, there's the discrepancy undermines any kind of credibility that they may have. So transparency is not the tagline that I think sometimes it's treated as, but it's actually more of a method of thinking through things that asks you to challenge yourself as a business owner to say, you know, how transparent do I want to be? There are going to be some considerations that can't be discussed.
Yes.
But even being able to say that is transparency, you know, being open about, well, I can't talk about that thing in particular. And, you know, really understanding as well that no communication is communication. Like a lot of businesses will sort of go and hide before they've got this perfect message to send out to either the market or their employees, and actually that tells that group something, and they start making assumptions and they start going down the route of well, what could that possibly be, and you can lose control of that messaging pretty quickly. So by the time you are saying something, no one believes you anyway.
Yes, and to earn again your credibility
Yeah.
takes much more effort, much more resources than be transparent since the very beginning. Because it's
Yeah.
very easy to earn, but it's very difficult then step by step to re-earn what you created in the past in terms of credibility. I can't remember the exact statistics, but they say that if one person, whether it's a customer or is an employee, is dissatisfied, that is going to dissatisfy other 17 people. Probably the ratio is not the correct one, but if we look at one and the other one is a 17, is a lot. So it's very, very important to use the transparency as the tool for growth rather than a tagline, as you mentioned.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the phrase that springs to mind there really is, you know, almost everyone is an influencer. If you're able to influence 17 people every time you have an insight about something, we have to remember that. It's not about the one disgruntled employee we've got who, oh well, everyone knows that they're a little bit miserable, and actually that person being allowed to stay unhappy or underperforming or frustrated or all of those things has this trickle effect across the whole team. Either they all take on that frustration, or their frustration comes from that person being allowed to act in a certain way, and they don't see them being dealt with appropriately. So, we're all influencers in our own little way. Alessandro, you are also an author. So tell me a bit more about your book.
Yes, so my book is called, in fact, Empathic Marketing. And one of the reason why I wrote the book is I really love, I was a sales agent when I was in Italy, and was everything very transactional in terms
Mm.
of relationship with other people. So I said, I need to find a way where I help small businesses, startups, where they become they create a transformational relationship to move from A, where you are now, to B, where you want to be. So I wrote this book, which is like a summary of what I usually do for 12 months with clients, in a way that is very accessible for everyone, whether you have a background in marketing or not. And there are a lot of thought-provoking questions that allowed you to become empathic, whether you want to apply within your company with a potential customer or client. The book allowed you to have a very, very strong foundation to become more empathic with your marketing. And the book is called Empathic Marketing.
Fantastic. Well, as always, Alessandro, we could be talking for hours.
Oh, yes.
But thank you so much for joining me today. And I'll make sure that there's a link to where people can get your book
Yeah.
at the bottom of this video.
Thank you so much, Lee, and for all the people that they are listening to us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.